Hey, it's Cosmic Charles here, and I'm back with a quick update for Temur Poison Storm, and I'll also include an in-depth tech of the engine of this deck, because the engine is quite large. It makes up pretty much the entire deck. I won't include the interaction just in the tech. I'm just going to do a tech of the engine. But first, I thought I'd show you what I changed. So I thought the build of my most recent league that I uploaded seemed very strong, but but I noticed as I was playing it that I would be almost always boarding out 2 Chalice due to artifact hate, and just having room to board something in. So I realized I could probably change the main deck in a way that was more supportive of how the deck would look post board. Because you do still need ramp a lot of the time, and if you can't rely on your Chalice, you're going to need something. So I decided to test out an Explorer. My buddy Jordan suggested this. And this is Explorer rather than Growth Spiral, because Growth Spiral costs green and blue, and that's a little too mana restrictive. So instead I run the Explorer. Now what's great about Explorer is in the early game, if you're lucky and you have like 3 depletion lands, it can quickly ramp you almost as well, if not better than a Chalice. I mean, Chalice is going to be the best, like, and fastest ramp you could possibly have, but it's not as reliable as just having the lands. And another thing it can do, though, is in the later game, it can kind of act almost as like a fast bond. Sometimes when you're, like, storming off and going through your deck and you're drawing, you can collect a lot of basics in your hand. So if you cast an Explore at like the start of your combo turn, and then you resolve like a Vivisurgent's Insight, let's say, and you draw like 2 basics in there, which not the best, but at least if you cast an Explore previously, you can play both of those lands that turn and continue storming off if you have more action in hand. So I found that to be pretty fun. I'm testing as a 2 of. I think 2's right. Another card that I've added in is the Abundant Harvest. So for Abundant Harvest, it's been very good. Like, in fact, when you have a specific, like, sequence on the top of your deck, like, let's say you have 3 lands and then a Surgeon's Insight or a 4C on the bottom, Abundant Harvest, just getting rid of 3 lands and grabbing one of those is almost as good as a 4C. Now, that's not going to happen all the time. That's pretty, like, conditional on what the sequence on the top of your deck's like, but that's pretty good when it does happen that way, because it will every now and then. And this also acts as a land tutor, so this can get the depletion lands. So I found that to be I found Abundant Harvest to be very strong. I do think it's only a 1 of, though. I don't think this is something I would run a 2 of, but I might be wrong about that. Yeah, and then to make room for all that, I cut the second copy of Tolarian Winds, because it's not... Tolarian Winds is pretty strong, but I think 2 is 1 too many. I did cut a Merchant Scroll because I think I really only need 6 for like initial poison, and if you have like 2 Merchant Scrolls in hand, it can get pretty awkward. So I figured 2 is enough. And yeah, and I decided to make greater use of the green, so I'm adding so I have 2 forests now. Yeah, and that's so then I have a lot of access for like fixing and stuff like that. So those are the updates. And now on to the engine. All right, so this is the engine of the deck. I decided to represent it as a Venn diagram in order to aid me to remember how to talk about it properly. So I'll explain the diagram first. So here are the 2 super categories. You have mana and you have draw. And then you have the 4 subcategories of fixing, ritual, ramp, and cantrips, and the 2 niche categories of loot and tutor. Now you'll notice I don't have any like specific like keyword things here, like proliferate or lands or things like that. Instead, what I've done is I've based the groups on like what the cards do, rather than any like keyword. For example, you'll see experimental augury here. Its proliferation is represented in the ritual, fixing, and ramp categories it is a part of. Because when you proliferate a Pentad Prism, it can be fixing, ritual, or ramp. If you proliferate an Everflowing Chalice, it's also ramp or ritual. And arguably, if you fix one of these not fix, if you proliferate one of these tap lands, then it will also add to your fixing because you can then still use that color. Yeah, so I guess I'll just go on to the cards now. So here, as you can see, as part of the core of the deck, oh, and also within a reason. For example, Vivisurgeon's Insight isn't part of Ritual because while it is possible for you to have enough artifacts on the battlefield that this could generate mana, it's not really likely or a play you should ever do. So yeah, so that's why I don't include something there like that. I do include the lands in fixing, even though they're terrible at it, because they are fixing. They tap for colored mana, so they count. All right, so I'll start here with a group. So here we have the mana subgroup. So this includes all of the things that can generate mana or get something that generates mana. So we have Abundant Harvest and Thirsting Roots, and the lands and the artifacts. These are the things that make mana. Now within that mana category, you see you have the depletion lands, which are fixing and ramp and mana, but they are not rituals because they enter the battlefield tapped. And over here you can see we have the basics, which do count as a ritual effect. When you run fewer basics in your deck, the basics you do run kind of act as a lotus petal, essentially, a lot of the time. And especially when you pair that with an explorer. And then you can really get these to act that way by adding another land drop. Thirsting Roots is more of a ritual when you combine it with Pentad Prism or Everflowing Chalice, not really for grabbing a basic because that's mana neutral. Yeah, and the basics are very important for that reason. And the artifacts, of course, especially Pentad Prism, hits mana, fixing, and ritual and ramp. So anytime you see something covering 4 categories, it's usually very important. And the Everflowing Chalice is also there as well. Yeah, and then here we see Abundant Harvest, which is the only card that goes between both mana and draw. It hits many categories. Again, I didn't add it to Ritual because while it can technically get something that would Ritual, I don't count it because it doesn't really replace its own mana cost there. I do count it as a ramp because it can grab these depletion lands. Yeah, and I also count it as draw because it can get any of these other ones, and I count it as a cantrip because it's a cheap card that replaces itself. You see Prologue here. I'm only counting it as a cantrip here because I'm not including interaction. And here we see the two more proliferators here. They're in the draw side. They're not in the mana side because they don't add mana themselves. And they're in cantrips because they're a cheap draw that replace themselves. Auguries, yeah, a little more than a cantrip, but I put it here anyway. And they also follow through on like many of the subcategories as well. And here we see Explore, which covers ramp and also draw, so that's important here. And now we see the Vivisurgeon's Insight, which does ramp because you get to use the mana. It adds to like because you might get to use the mana, it adds to your Prism or your Chalice the next turn, and it also adds for fixing because you can fix whatever colors you tapped in the generic for more blue by proliferating Pentad Prisms. And here in the draw we also have another piece of fixing, Manamorphose, which is also a draw. It's a very good card in the deck. And then 4C, which is just a very powerful draw spell. And then also within the draw spell, even though they technically aren't draw, but I'm using draw to mean like whatever gives you new cards in hand. We have Tolarian Winds, which is a very big loot. Works very well with Merchant Scroll, which is our tutor. Yeah, so that was pretty much the engine. So if you're looking for like, to maybe add or take things out or like what thing has flex, just think about these categories. And whatever you're taking out, what can you replace it with that still has, decent coverage, or maybe just does something different. For example, I cut a Everflowing Chalice as a ritual because I had these 2 Explorers, which while won't always be rituals, do ritual and add to my draw count as well. Yeah, so that's the engine. All right. Hope you enjoyed. Oh, I guess one more thing. So with the addition of Explore, I have now up to, I believe, 28 cards that draw and 32 that don't. It's important to try and get your cards that don't draw as low as you can. As close to parity, preferably less than parity. Like, you want, like, the inverse, like 32 cards that draw, 28 that don't, and that makes it much easier to hit your those long runs of action. That's another reason for running Abundant Harvest as well. So yeah, that's another reason why I was putting Explorer, just trying to up my draw count. Yeah, so that was the engine and the update. All right, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.